Good morning, and welcome to the Africa Weekly Talk. Today's subject on the docket is about the immigration issues and problems that sometimes fellow other Africans have to go through or encounter when they leave the shores of Africa to travel and visit other countries around the world. And this particular subject today really hits home. It really hits home because we're talking about fellow Black Africans going to visit other Black countries around the world. And when they get there, and they have to go through sometimes these horrible immigration processes and problems, that becomes another, sad story. They're talking about Black people encountering other Black countries. And we're not talking about Black people leaving Africa to go and visit Europe, Asia, or America. But we're talking about other Black countries. Specifically, talk about the Caribbean. And this has to do with a recent video that was posted by WODE and JULIUS MAPONGA of Zimbabwe, talking about their own personal experiences and encounter in the Caribbean. So, fellas, let's go ahead and hear a sit-down interview that WODE did with JULIUS MAPONGA, talking about some of the problems that they encounter in the Caribbean. And I'll come back and dissect this whole Caribbean colonial mindset and so on and so forth. So let's go ahead and hear what they had to say with regards to this issue. It is unfortunate that we're living in the modern world today, and still we're talking about Africans have to go through this. It is unfortunate, but that's the reality of the world we live in. It is sad. So let's go ahead and hear what they have to say.
We are in the Caribbean, so let's talk about the Caribbean. You're supposed to be out of Jamaica by now, but you're back. How did you get back here?
Oh, it's a nightmare. It's a nightmare. And I think when we look at Africa and its challenges, it's one thing. But when you look at the Caribbean and its subtle, semi-civilized first world mindset. When you're coming in, you think you're going to be meeting progressive people who Gavi is coming from here, Mali is coming from here, from this region. So you'd expect some certain amount of sensitivity to geopolitical, historical disadvantaging. But to have Black people now sitting in positions of authority and reinforcing with power, enforce the draconian laws of colonialism, unbelievable. So I came in here because I was avoiding the visa ports, both in Europe, Middle East, and in America. I said I would get to Jamaica and use a non-visa route. And the non-visa route for me was either Johannesburg, Paris, as long as I was going to remain in the airport for about 6 hours, then connect Paris, Cuba, Kingston. Or I would have gone through, London, non-starter. Miami, non-starter. New York, non-starter. So I opted for Sao Paulo, Panama, into here. After getting here, the conference finished on Friday. So Saturday there was no flight out. So I opted, let me get a flight into Dominican Republic, because then I would connect quickly into Guarulhos, and from Guarulhos straight into Sao Paulo, and I'm out of here. And to my shock and dismay, I was detained in Dominican Republic for 4 days.
4 days?
Denied food, water to bath and to drink. I was denied a bed to sleep. I literally sat on the bench for 4 days. I bought 4 tickets to go back home, and all those tickets expired with their instructions that go and get something like this, go, like make an internet, phone my wife and phone people, buy tickets, I come and bring them. No, the airline does not want to carry you. Next story, Panama wants a visa, you must supposed to go there. But I don't need a visa according to the documentation. Brazil needs a visa. ultimately, no, it's our law that we must take you back to the country where you came from. Then you can restart your trip from there because you're using two different flights. So you can, some stupid little story that is unheard of. And only to come back into Jamaica and be locked in for another 2 hours plus $400 to buy a new visa to come back into the country. So as of today, I have to apply for a visa altogether into Brazil, though on paper, it's not required, but the airlines want it. So we must apply for it. Went to Panama to get a documentation from the embassy, though we don't need it, but the airlines want it. So when I get those documents, I hopefully can begin to move away from here and go back home. But if anyone is coming to Dominican Republic, at your own risk. They are racist, very segregated, they are horrible, there's language barrier, they are just terrible people.
How was the experience like being locked up for 4 days?
I think it is slave trade on steroids. That you can be having credit cards in your hands. You can be a door. Literally from where they locked me up, the door which was selling food was like where that tree is. And they would put guards here, not to make sure that I don't go there and buy food.
My goodness.
And just sit there. My embassy called. They wrote a letter. I can show you the letter to release, but they just said their own ambassador for Dominican Republic, who is in Cuba, liaised with my embassy to say, release that man. They still refused. So I became a prisoner in the Caribbean. And where I was, by the way, Domingo means the dogs of God. This is the place where also the slaves who arrived and be kept in prisons there. And then distributed in parts of the Caribbean, including here where we are. So I felt that maybe it was more as a spiritual thing that I had to experience this, but it was horrible. It was horrible.
But you came to Jamaica with a visa too, right?
Yes.
And then when you arrived, the same visa should have allowed you to enter again.
And again, this whole visa thing is a big scam. It's just a polite way of managing, sanctioning people, restricting movement of people, prioritizing your own national interest above everyone else's interests, and making sure that Africans don't speak to each other. Because if you notice the countries that have most of the visa restrictions, like when I was there, do you have an American? Because they said, do you have an ID? And guess me, being me, I produced my South African ID. No, do you have another ID? Then I produced my Zimbabwean ID. No, these are not IDs. On my face.
So what is an ID?
No, an ID is an American ID, a European ID, a British ID, or a Canadian ID. Those are the ID. Those are IDs. The rest of these are not ID. Those are not ID. But he said he wanted an ID. And me being me, I said, how can you say another sovereign country's ID is not an ID? When you ask for an ID, what do you think this is? It's not really a national identity card. No, when we talk about ID, we only mean America, Britain, and Canada.
I think it's extremely hell to travel in the Caribbean as an African.
And West, I think our brothers here and sisters have been brainwashed also to be suspicious towards their own brothers. And it's sad. Because just imagine, the Caribbean in its totality, maybe it houses a couple of millions of people. If you can take the amount of human resource in the Caribbean on its own, then they could focus at servicing Africa. There's no one in the Caribbean who should be out without a job. Highly skilled job. America is harvesting from the Caribbean. Europe is harvesting from the Caribbean. Imagine the amount of resources within Africa. If the Caribbean will just open its borders and allow the trade of uranium, of gold, of platinum, power stations, allow the ships. And this really pisses me off. Sorry for the language. That during slave trade, ships docked at Ghana then, docked at Gorée Island, docked at St. Helena, and moved straight to the Caribbean. Immediately slave was closed. To come back on the same route, you must do an extra 35,000 kilometers to the left and to the right. And to date, as we speak right now, there's no direct flight between all the islands,
right,
and Mother Africa. Yet Gavi, yet Mali, we're all talking about repatriation and moving Africa. How do you move back home when you don't even have the transport? Or the routes. I'm looking at all the Caribbean ministers. I'm looking at all the Caribbean presidents, all the Caribbean governors. You must be sick in your heads and wasting time sitting in your offices, smoking and burning taxpayers' money when you cannot deliver.
So, fellows, now you heard what WODE and Julius Maponga had to talk about with regards to their own experiences in the Caribbean. It is unfortunate and very sad for fellow Black people to travel to the Caribbean and to go through these experiences. I mean, but that's the reality when you hold an African passport. You heard him talking about them asking him if he had another ID. So basically, they won't even have respect for the South African or Zimbabwe ID that he had. So they were expecting him to either have an American ID, a British ID, or a Canadian ID. And to be frank with you guys, the African passport has no respect around the world. That's the fact. The African passport has no respect around the world. That's an unfortunate fact. I mean, talking about fellow Black countries in the Caribbean don't even respect the African passport. They expect you to have an American ID or British or Canadian ID before they will give you some respect. Because let me tell you guys, fellas, if this dude was holding an American passport, he wouldn't have to go through the problems that he went through down there. I'm sorry, it will never happen. Never happen. The immigration officers as Dominican Republic will never treat him this way with an American passport. Heck no. They will never even dare try. It's not going to happen. Because the American passport is so powerful that when you traveling around the world with an American passport, they don't question you. They don't. Because they know the power behind that passport. But when you travel around the world with an African passport, it's unfortunate, but that's the reality. And this is the problems that you're going to go through with an African passport. And it saddens me more when you have to go through dealing with other Black countries. I mean, we're not talking about you going to even Asia or Europe or America. We're talking about Black countries around the world. And you have to go through this. But fellas, I wasn't even surprised when he talked about Dominican Republic, Santo Domingo. Look, Santo Domingo is the capital of the Willie Lynch syndrome. I mean, that is the capital of the Willie Lynch syndrome in the Caribbean. I mean, this is a country that was called Hispaniola about 100 and something years ago. And this is the very country that was liberated by Haiti. It was Haiti that freed the slaves of Dominican Republic. And eventually, Haiti colonized that country for 25 years. That is what we are talking about. This is a country that was freed by Haiti. And Haiti colonized it for 25 years until the Americans and the Spanish people came back and drove the Haitians out of Dominican Republic. It was a Haitian colony. And you know, these people are like mulattoes. So they've had this Willie Lynch syndrome going back the very days when their slave masters had children with the slaves. So they have this mixture of mulattoes, and then you have dark skin and and then brown skin people down there. And out of that inferiority complex mindset, that divide and conquer of that Willie Lynch syndrome, some of these people down there see themselves closer to the whites, especially these mulattoes. So they look at the dark skin, brown skin Haitians and people of their country, they look at them differently. And that translates also to when they see other Black people from Africa or the Caribbean coming to that country. As a matter of fact, a couple of years ago, the State Department, the United States State Department, had a bulletin warning to African Americans going to Dominican Republic on these same issues, especially when they were deporting a lot of Haitians that had been born in Dominican Republic were being forcibly deported because they didn't want these Haitians. They said the Haitians were bringing crime and all that nonsense down there. So they were deporting Haitians, treating them very horribly. So this is nothing new to hear. When you're talking about the way Dominican Republic have been treating, especially looking at Haitians going back years. And the unfortunate part is, like I stated earlier, this is a country that was freed and liberated with the blood of the people of Haiti. And today, this is how they're treating their cousins and brothers, because they have a lot of mulattoes down there. So they tend to see themselves like they better than the people of Haiti. And they translate that to other Black people coming there, especially if you don't have an American passport. So if you don't have an American passport or a European passport, all hell will break loose on you down there. And that's the saddest truth about Dominican Republic. They have this inferiority mindset. That still dawns on that citizens of that country. They have been brainwashed and indoctrinated from the very beginning when the slave masters left that country. So they have this inferiority mindset. They don't see themselves like, they are lost identity. They have identity crisis down there. They don't really know who they are. They want to be Black Africans or they want to be close to the white man. And out of that inferiority mindset also contributes to the way they see other Black people when they come down there. But that's unfortunate. It is unfortunate. But this also goes down to one thing about African governments. I mean, we're talking about just about a couple of years ago, 2019, when African countries such as Ghana did the Year of Return, inviting Black people from the diaspora, giving citizenship to Black people from the diaspora, from the Caribbean, and Blacks all over the world. Kenya did it quite recently. Sierra Leone did it. Liberia is doing it. And a lot of African countries offering citizenship to Black people all over the world and from the diaspora to come back home. And for African countries to be doing this to the Blacks in the diaspora, the Caribbean, and so on, and for Black people from Africa to experience this also in the Caribbean, is very sad. Because we're talking about time when Africans are saying that, look, these are our brothers and sisters that were enslaved. Their ancestors were enslaved. Now it's time for them to come back home. So we're giving them citizenship. As a matter of fact, the AU should even incorporate this into their charter, where all Black people all over the world can apply for citizenship, should be able to apply for citizenship in any African country because of the issue of slavery. But when you hear stories like this, where Black people coming from Africa are being treated in the Caribbean, then it's also very, very sad. It's also very, very sad because it shouldn't be. I mean, I can understand going through problems like this in Asia or maybe in Europe or America. I mean, but not in a Black country. That's sad. But you know what? I'm also not surprised in the sense that even within our own continent, the continent of Africa, sometimes we treat our own fellow African citizens coming from other African countries to other African countries even horrible, just as horrible as the experiences that he went through. In some cases, even worse. So at the end of the day, if we treat ourselves like that on our own continent, it makes it even very difficult to even make a case against a country like Santo Domingo, Dominican Republic, or the Caribbean countries when they treat Black Africans like this. Because within our own continent, we treat ourselves horrible when it comes to the issue of migration. You always hear about countries like South Africa maltreating Ethiopians, Somalians, Nigerians, Ghanaians, Zimbabweans, and so on and so forth. So when we are doing this to ourselves on the continent of Africa, where we have very bad immigration policy towards each other, how can you make a case against a country in the Caribbean when they're treating fellow Black Africans like that? It is difficult to make a case because we have not been doing good to our own citizens within the continent of Africa, which is very, very sad. And also talking about the passport, the African passport. I mean, fellas, I'm going to be real and objective on this. The African passport has no respect around the world. Let's face it. Let's face it, fellas. The African passport has no respect around the world. It is not respected. And if you heard what he said, they were expecting him to produce another ID. Look, fellas, only reason why the African passport is not respected is because, one, Africans are considered to be poor. Number one. The human African is considered to be poor. By terms of wealth, the continent, Africa, is supposed to be the richest continent on this planet. But when it comes to the human African, we are considered to be the poorest on this planet. So out of that, even our own fellow brothers and sisters in the Caribbean, also having been brainwashed and indoctrinated, see African citizens coming to visit or migrating to the Caribbean also as poor and coming there with problems. That is the saddest truth. And this goes down to sometimes our bad, corrupt governments. Our bad, corrupt governments who have not been able to build a better Africa for the African citizens. So this boils down to the citizens of Africa, because when you use the passport, an African passport traveling around the world, you are looked upon based on the continent. Based on the continent, because they look at the continent as a poor continent. And out of that, we don't have any respect around the world. We don't have any respect. I mean, they look at our political systems, they look at the economic systems, they look at everything. And they look at us like we are poor, we have no good political structures, we have corrupt governments, and all of that. And that translates to how they see our African citizens when they leave the continent of Africa. We do it to ourselves on our own continent, so it shouldn't be surprised if you're going to experience that when you leave the continent of Africa. I mean, look, fellas, it is sad. It is of unfortunate and sadness to hear that fellow Black Africans have to go through these problems when they leave Africa to go and visit another Black country. But this old colonial mindset that exists in the Caribbean also exists on the continent of Africa. It also exists there, like I stated earlier. And look at the way we treat ourselves, each other. Treat each other. Talking about a Black person moving from one African country to another country. Look at the way we treat ourselves. So if we treat ourselves that way, I mean, sometimes even an African migrating from Africa to Western Europe or America is even treated way better. I mean, not even sometimes. They are even treated far better than the way we treat ourselves on the continent of Africa. And like I stated earlier also, because of our bad, corrupt governments, these corrupt governments in our various African countries have contributed to our problems. I mean, they still have this old colonial mindset that we still have royalties, that we're still giving to former colonial masters. That has also contributed to the level of poverty on that continent. We have good natural resources. We are the richest continent in terms of natural resources on this planet, but we don't hold anything. I mean, quite recently, I heard about African governments talking about they're going to use gold to back their local currencies. I seem like they have some gold sitting there, bars sitting there in their countries. The last time I checked, the country with the highest gold reserves is the United States of America. You guys can go Google it yourselves. the country with the highest gold bar reserves in this world is the United States of America. We have the gold under our soil in Africa, but the country with the highest reserves right now is the United States of America by far. By far. It's not even close. The second country to America. Go Google it yourselves and find out. So this is what we are talking about. It is unfortunate, but that's the reality. The reality of when our corrupt systems also contribute to the problems that our citizens have to face when they leave the continent. Because we have no respect around the world. We have no respect. I mean, even when we go to Asia, and we talk about even poor countries in Asia don't respect countries in Africa. We have corrupt governments who steal money from their various African countries and go and invest them in Dubai to help build the country Dubai. Go and look at the money that have been stolen from Nigeria, from Ghana, from South Africa, from Zimbabwe, from all African countries that they have invested in Dubai, real estate development. These corrupt politicians, that's where they now invest in their money, in Dubai, to build Dubai. And meanwhile, you go to Dubai, go to the Middle East and see the way they treat fellow Black Africans down there. And these are the countries that you go and visit and you pay homage to. You put your money there to help build them up. And then when you go there, they treat your fellow citizens horribly. And you acknowledge these countries. I mean, how stupid can we be? The very places that we put our money there are the very people who treat our people horribly. And we continue to do that. And why don't we put this money in our various African countries to build our own continent? So that we can visit our own continent. Because we have beautiful places on that continent. But rather because of the same old colonial mindset, the same old inferiority complex mindset, the Willie Lynch syndrome that also exists on the continent of Africa, we tend to see these countries to be better. Meanwhile, these are some of the worst countries on this planet. We don't even see what we have on the continent. So fellows, listening to this and watching this video, it is sad. It is very, very unfortunate that these two gentlemen have to talk about some of these experiences that they have to go through in the Caribbean. It is unfortunate, but we have to look at ourselves. Look at ourselves. And I hope our leaders will be watching these videos. Because at the end of the day, they are the very ones who have contributed to the problems that citizens of Africa have to go through when they leave the continent of Africa. Because of their corrupt mindset, because of their old colonial mindset, the inferiority complex mindset, that everything white, European or Asian is better. So when they see Black people coming from the continent, they always see us as coming there to beg or to do something illegal or whatever. So at the end of the day, this is the situation that most Africans living the continent tend to go through. It's unfortunate, but that's the reality, fellows. It's sad. You know, I mean, Dominican Republic, I mean, I would never advise anybody to visit the country like that. I'm sorry. I mean, I wouldn't put my money in any country that doesn't respect a Black person, a people of my same color or my origin. I will never put any money, investment in any country like that. And it's about time we start thinking wisely. Stop putting money in these countries. Stop visiting these countries, fellows. Let's stop visiting these countries that oppress our fellow Black people. Period. Don't go there. Don't spend your money there. Don't help them build their wealth down there. Dubai included. African citizens, stop patronizing Dubai, all that nonsense. I mean, this artificial stuff they're doing down there, man. We can do better on the continent of Africa. Let's focus on building wealth in Africa. Because you go there and they don't respect you. Why do you have to put your money in places where you are not respected? Where they frown upon on you when they see you? I mean, it's a shame. So it's about time we start thinking and think Africa first and build our continent before we start talking about investing in other countries. So if it's Sunday, it's the Africa Weekly Talk. God bless you guys. and have a great week. Peace and love, and thank you.